Bienvenidos a la
Good morning and welcome to the annual meetings of the IDB Group. It is a pleasure to have you all here today and for those of us joining online for this broadcast. Before we begin, please bear in mind this event will be in Spanish and English. For those of you that are joining us online, you can select the channel in the language you prefer.
IDB Group Annual Meetings. It is a pleasure to join the audience in the room and those following us online for this broadcast. Before we begin, please note that the event will be in both Spanish and English. Those following us online can choose the channel in their preferred language. We will also like to inform you that there will be a Q&A session. You may submit your questions by scanning the QR code on the screen. To open this forum, it is my pleasure to invite to the stage the president of the IDB Group, Ilan Goldfein, for opening remarks.
So, good morning, muy buenos días, bom dia, gusto estar acá.
It's a pleasure to be here with you in Asunción to have this discussion, and the discussion that we've had 1 or 2 years ago. And if I may, I'm going to switch to English.
Many of you here, and a lot of you are joining us online, work on a wide range of issues, from children and youth to health to sustainable development and many others, bringing all of us together to discuss our shared priorities is very valuable. Today, my plan is to tell you about 3 things. 1, what is our vision? How we plan to continue to engage with civil society. Number 2, we had a stock take from American University about how are we doing with the engagement with civil society. So let me share with you some of these findings. And last but not least, I'm going to update you on the next steps in terms of this process of engagement with the CSO. But it's important, and you remember that, we always have this forum to hear you, to hear all of you. How can we do better? What are the issues in your mind? So, as I said last time, the IDB Group is going through a transition, more than a transition, a transformation in a lot of dimensions, but also regarding civil society. We are aiming at strengthening and elevating this relationship. So we decided, as I mentioned, this year's Civil Society Forum should focus on building the next IDB Civil Society Engagement Plan. That is what we're going to do this year. We're going to devise the strategy, the plan with you. So we have taken concrete steps. We have now a civil society group that was moved from one vice presidency for countries to the Department of External Relations and Communications that are reporting also to me. In September, we've chosen a new head of the civil society group. So it's a group that has been moved to the right place, and with a new head, Tatiana Shore has assumed, and she has been very active with you, all of that. So I'm happy to say that we have with us today 70 civil society organizations in this annual meeting, from traditional communities, from indigenous, Afro-descendants, several organizations. Let me begin in this opening to tell you about our vision for the civil society. The last time The IDB reviewed its engagement was in 2018, when the civil society engagement strategy was approved at that time, 2018. It is time to renew it, review it. The region has changed, the context has changed, and our institution certainly is changing. So we believe it's the right time and the right moment to work together to strengthen this plan. At the IDB, we see, and that is a very important point, we see civil society organizations as allies. You are part of our projects, part of our strategies, part of how we operate at the institution. It is a relevant stakeholder. You help us better understand the realities of our region, and you push us to be more effective and accountable. Yes, you push us. That's part of your job. Our job is to incorporate that. So first, let me tell you about some of this engagement. First, collaboration needs to go beyond just strategies and country strategies. It has to go into helping us design better projects and their implementation. Not only when we design a project, we're going to approve a project, but afterwards. So I can give you examples. One of the examples I have here is from Panama in the Nagabi-Bugle indigenous region, where we supported the rehabilitation of a road, which has some challenges. It involved dialogue with communities, which had cultural issues on how we design it, how we assigned regarding the local needs. At the end, we believe the project was better. It was a sustainable project with strong community ownership, broader benefits for developing, including improved access to service and mobility. So this is the type of examples we want to promote. Second, collaboration in policy development and follow-up, particularly on access to information. So we want to engage with civil society in several dimensions. For example, we had the new access to information policy. We work with civil society. It's a collaboration that needs to continue through workshops, public consultations, and follow-up meetings focused on implementation of what was already approved, which was the access to information. So it's a shared priority. You want access, we want to provide this access. And the access information policy is the rule. So let's help us implement. Number three, engagement at the country level beyond country strategies, as I mentioned. So country strategies is important. We need to continue looking at it. Let me give you examples. The other day in Trinidad and Tobago, they created the Next Gen Board, a modern evolution of the traditional CONSOC. So they provide a more active and meaningful participation. The Next Gen Board serves as a forum for dialogue on national priorities. So I believe that members help support implementation of the country strategy. They shape new initiatives, monitor projects, and issue recommendations. So this type of model has been institutionalized with clear terms of reference and transfer selection processes. So the access to information need to reflect our relationship with civil society, one built on trust, collaboration, accountability, and continuous dialogue. Last but not least, we need to be transparent even when we have grievance issues. We need to provide grievance mechanisms. A strong relationship with civil society must also include spaces for dialogue around concerns. The IDB Group's grievance management mechanism allows us, it's there, it allows us to listen to communities, identifies issues early in the process, and improve the project quality while reducing risks, environmental, social, and other risks. So that's about what we believe should be part of the basis for the engagement. Let me tell you about the American University Stocktake. What did they found? So we are reviewing the engagement plan. We want to be evidence-based. So any change must begin with us looking at what are the recommendations. That was done in December by the American University School of International Service, that they have the experience to do that. So they interviewed 67 people deeply, both 43 civil society representatives, but also staff members of the IDB. They went to the COP30 to look at how civil society is organized. They talked to people there. So based on that, they prepare a document that summarizes the main findings. Yesterday, I believe, several of you were in workshop groups looking at those findings. But let me tell everybody here, what are the findings? One, we need further work on communication and access to information. Civil society recognizes the recent changes and improvement. They do, but I think that we need to continue improving. More communication, more access. Number two, we need to leave the tailor-made, the ad hoc, and institutionalize the processes. Processes are not bad, they are good, they institutionalize. Number three, stakeholder should receive information, but we need to think about the civil society as an ally in designing and implementing projects. So civil society goes beyond us telling you what are we doing. It's about you working with us to actually design and implement the projects. Number four, and that's an interesting conclusion, they found quite a bit of alignment between what the IDB staff wants and what the civil society wants. They basically believe the same. And that's very important, because if we have joint goals, joint objectives, that will make it much easier to reach the right way. So I believe that we're looking at these findings, looking at this evidence, looking at the workshops that were yesterday, it will be very important for us to decide. So what are the next steps? So the next phase is what we're already doing, dialogue, and a nice word that is called co-creation, which is basically designing together the next plan. So we work with the 70 organizations. They were at our offices, our nice offices, to be honest. Nice, expanding offices. So yesterday we have 70 there, and they were talking about our next plan. So we want the civil society to be actively involved in this plan. What are we going to do with all this dialogue and workshops? We're going to devise a first draft of the new engagement plan. We want to do it still this semester. So you'll have a document with the new plan already and discussion this semester. And we want to convene another civil society forum after we have the draft to discuss. So a draft this semester, then we convene a new meeting with you. Hopefully, and I will make sure it happens, we will have a new civil society engagement plan this year for the IDB for the future. So let me close saying, as I underscored now, we deeply value civil society organizations. You are partners to the IDB Group. Your engagement is not a noise. Your engagement makes us strong and make us better. We look forward to continuing this dialogue and to working even more closely with you in the days ahead, starting with the next panel and the next hours. Thank you very much. Hope everything is good.
Thank you very much, President Goldfein. Now we will go to the first panel. Let's begin. We welcome to the stage James Scriven, CEO of IDB Invest. Anabel Gonzalez, Vice President for Countries and Regional Integration. Ana Maria Ibáñez, Vice President for Sectors and Knowledge. Graham Macmillan, CEO of IDB Lab. And the moderator, Amanda Glassman, Executive Advisor to the President. Amanda, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hola, muchas gracias y bienvenidos todos. We're excited to be here. As you heard from President Goldfein, civil society engagement is really core to the IDB Strategy Plus. We've just had an evidence-based stock take by the American University together with civil society partners. And this stock take is going to feed in to a new civil society engagement plan. And this panel, where the whole group sits together, is going to reflect on the findings of this stock take. And it really launches the official design now of our new engagement plan. And we're going to ask our panelists one guiding question, which is how can civil society be meaningfully engaged beyond consultations to ensure shared ownership and relevance? So we'll start with our CEO of IDB Invest, James Scriven. As you know, IDB Invest operates under a different model. They have private sector clients, They're not working directly with governments. And so as we develop this new plan, James, how would you see IDB Invest contributing to that effort, and how do you see civil society engagement going forward?
Thanks, Amanda, and it's a privilege and an honor to be with all of you. I remember when we all fitted in a small room and we could take a photo with a selfie, so congratulations to all of you joining us today. As Amanda said, we're no longer three different institutions, we're a group. And as you heard from Len's presentation, we're operating as a group. So the first understanding is there's a shared vision of our engagement with NGOs, civil society organizations at a group level. And Tatiana, who was introduced this morning, represents the group towards civil society organizations. So that's an important point. Second, you might have heard from the voice of Ilan and others that the private sector is growing fast. And I know that your attention was primarily focused on the public sector, and suddenly you saw this other part growing very fast. We're here to engage with you, to collaborate with you, for you to get a much better understanding and us get a better understanding of how you see projects that we do. So the first message I want to convey is a message of alignment. We operate as a group. Our policies cut across the group, even though our clients are slightly different, but we operate as a group, and I think that is important. Second, many, many years ago, our shareholders decided that at a group level, the private sector should grow very fast, and I'm sure Graham will talk about IDB Lab growing, but IDB Invest is on a very strong trajectory of growth. And that growth is creating much more complexity to our projects than we had before. So for example, our shareholders were very clear that they want us to engage in tough real sector projects. Our title of our business plan was Be Bold in Infrastructure, and I know that that creates enormous complexities in the work we do, but I think it's important that you to understand that we're going to be bolder in the type of deals and the type of sectors we're engaging with. The third one is we need to shift how we do our business. Traditionally, our business was we look at it internally, we analyze it, and then we consult. We need to move away from this word of engagement to collaboration. Co-creation was a word that our president used this morning. I think that's an important piece of how we're changing. And I know over the years with Gabriel and Leonardo and many others, we have engaged successfully in very important, very difficult projects. And I'm more than happy to go through those ones. But the final message I want to convey is I stand over here representing IDB Invest, a growing part of the IDB Group, and we're ready to not only engage, but more importantly, dialogue and collaboration.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, James. Now let's go to our Vice President for Countries, Anabel Gonzalez. One of the big insights from this stock take is the role and importance of consultation and dialogue during the process of preparing country strategies. That's how the group decides and negotiates with our government counterpart how we'll work together. And there's a key role for the civil society country committees, or el Consejo Consultivo de la Sociedad Civil, CONSOC, in this process. So could you tell us a little bit about how your team is working with civil society in the preparation of these country strategies?
Primero que todo, muy buenos días. Es un gran gusto.
First of all, good morning. It is a great pleasure to be here in Asunción, to see many of you once again. Those of you who have joined us at these fora over recent years. I'm going to switch to English, but I'll begin by...
Really goes to the heart of how we are evolving our country strategy work. Our new country strategy framework strengthens engagement with civil society by making it more structured, more transparent, and more continuous. We have deepened the dialogue through structured consultations aligned with national and institutional priorities. Because our strategies are built around selectivity and medium-term engagement, engagement with civil society organizations at this early stage, at the stage of the development of the country strategy, ensures that the priorities reflect inclusion, sustainability, institutional capacity, and the realities that are faced by communities. Now, we're also refining our process to better identify CSOs, engage them meaningfully, and very importantly, follow up transparently on how their inputs are reflected in the country strategy. And at the same time, we aim to clarify and elevate the role of the consults, and I'll come to this a little bit later, positioning them as strategic partners in the country strategy cycle, in the renewed country strategy, in the renewed CSO strategy. Now, importantly, and this goes to the third point that I was making, engagement does not end with the approval of the strategy. We remain in dialogue throughout implementation and monitoring, and this allows civil society to continue informing our work and help us adjust when needed. Now, to illustrate how this operates in practice, let me refer briefly to the recently approved country strategy for Panama, 2025 to 2029. So during its preparation, we gathered diverse and territorially inclusive perspectives that help refine and also in some cases challenge our initial thinking on such important issues as migration, labor markets, and fiscal reform. Consultations included business federations, academic institutions, and indigenous and community organizations from Las Comarcas. We also engaged in discussions around complex issues such as inequality and watershed protection. So these dialogues helped basically shape the strategy's inclusion and sustainability agenda. And engagement has continued beyond approval. Our country office and all of our teams continue to meet regularly with chambers, think tanks, local organizations to advance concrete initiatives. In Colón, for example, we are working with local authorities and CSO partners to translate dialogue and operational support. So before I finalize, let me just say a word about the CONSOCs, because these are indeed very important organizations in shaping our medium and long-term vision. And here I think they play a critical role in three ways. First, by bringing ground-level knowledge and lived experience, particularly as it regards vulnerable populations. Second, by strengthening transparency and accountability in policy dialogue and implementation. And third, by contributing to innovation and partnerships, helping scale solutions at the local level. So ultimately, country strategies are about impact. And impact requires broad ownership. Civil society is not an external stakeholder, it's really a development partner. Thank you, Amanda.
Super. Thank you for those specific examples. I hope everybody can hear, because I'm hearing a huge echo. Is everything okay on the sound? Okay, great. Now let's go to Ana Maria Ibanez, who's our Vice President for Sectors and Knowledge. One of the big insights of the stocktake is also that often we work with civil society through individual relationships. And the President talked about how to institutionalize those processes better. Tell us a little bit about how you envision this institutionalization going forward.
Thank you, Amanda. First, let me say hello to all of you. Un gusto tenerlos a todos acá.
It's a pleasure to have you all here.
Something that is important is that this process of stock taking and the new engagement plan that we are doing with the individual society is important for formalizing the participation and the engagement of civil society organizations. But we need to continue preserving the direct and personal nature that makes the relationship meaningful. And I would like to talk about two examples or two processes that we have currently in the institution that is very important to engage with civil society. And we engage through the specific projects that we implement on environmental and social aspects. We do so in two ways. The first one is an engagement plan for each individual project that we have, but especially so for the high-risk projects. And secondly, we have the Environmental and Social Grievance Protocol, the IDB Environmental and Social Grievance Protocol that was created in 2021. Let me go to the first one, the engagement plan through each of the projects. This includes a grievance mechanism that is managed by our clients, by the countries that are executing the projects and the executing agencies. But as part of our supervision, we monitor the implementation of this engagement plan with our clients to improve their effectiveness and to improve their performance. The second level is IDB's Environmental and Social Grievance Protocol. This is important. This is led by us, by the IDB, and especially by the Vice Presidency of Sectors and Knowledge. And this is a mechanism that allows stakeholders to voice concerns related to environmental and social aspects of IDB finance projects. The grievance protocol is therefore an important channel for listening and promoting dialogue for the resolution of these types of grievances. Any person, either individually or collectively, who is concerned about these aspects can file a grievance through the IDB grievance protocol. So it's a very formal process. Since its creation in 2021, when our policy framework became effective, the protocol has received 235 complaints. It has picked up speed since 2023. In 2023, we had 20 complaints. In 2024, 75. And then last year we had 100, but we expect and we hope that this will pick up speed and we have more complaints. Why is this important? Because it provides us with an early warning for potential concerns with some of our projects, but very importantly, because it gives us lessons learned. And it gives us lessons learned, which then feed back into the design of the projects, especially to tackle those recurrent grievance drivers and to avoid the escalation of some of the problems that we have. So this grievance protocol is a way precisely to institutionalize our process and to be engaged with the civil society, and we hope to continue strengthening it.
Great, thank you. And I think that's a great example of the kind of process we can use to engage formally, institutionally, and early. Thank you, Ana Maria. Now we're going to go to our new CEO of IDB Lab, Graham McMillan, who just started a couple of months ago, and to ask you, as IDB Lab changes its model and its trajectory for the future, how do you envision civil society engagement?
Thank you, Amanda. And thank you to our host, the Paraguay, for an exciting next few days. And it's a privilege to sit here with my colleagues. It's the first time I've had a chance to share a stage in such an austere environment. So thank you. It's exciting for me to share a few words of my now beginning my third month as the CEO of the lab. But just to acknowledge my own origin in this space started in civil society, working with communities, disabled communities, communities impacted by access to services. And my own growth in the near 30 years that I've been doing this work was informed by those experiences in community. Recognizing, though, that solutions to scale where as many people can benefit as possible frequently, not always, but frequently are driven by market-based solutions, where the private sector, working in partnership with public sector, can actually develop solutions at scale. So from a principle standpoint, that's what informs me. And I want to just sort of acknowledge that the lab, the Multilateral Investment Fund, has an incredibly long history and tradition, and in fact was born out of service to civil society in partnership with civil society. More than 30 years, in fact, in partnership and design of new ideas, new solutions in every corner of the region. So our very own story is in fact informed by thoughts and engagement with civil society partners. But I can appreciate, as you hear some of the language, even the term the lab, it suggests something different. Forward-looking, MIF4 is very much focused on innovation in partnership with the private sector. And if I was in a civil society organization, I would ask, well, what about us? Did you forget about us? And the answer is no. You are with us. Fundamentally, you have informed who we are. If you meet any member of the lab team, you will know fundamentally they are from and for the community. But the tools have to be different. And that's really the story of the lab. We have to bridge, not just as the lab, by the way, but the entire team here as the group. We have to bridge where the new ideas are coming from, but then bringing them to scale either through policy and regulation and practice with our public sector colleagues, or certainly with the private sector with our colleagues at Invest. And so my hope is that the lab continues to bring its history forward into the present by anchoring in trust and anchoring in community benefit. And if I can give just one quick example that I think exemplifies the tension of where we are looking into the future and all of the tremendous change that every one of us are experiencing right now. I suspect that this meeting 20 years ago would not have had the devices that are all sitting in our pockets, constantly letting us know what's going on or where we're gonna be, or predicting what we're gonna eat for lunch. It's very possible that that's happening. But that's in fact what we're facing right now. And if you're in a community, civil society organization, you're uncertain how that can benefit you or negatively impact you. And so one project that the lab is invested in here in Paraguay is a project called Guarania. And it's in partnership with the Center for Engineering, Research, Development, and Technologies, or CDIT. And it's a recognition that digitization of everything in society is happening rapidly, whether it's in the private sector or the public sector, whether it's in schools or in hospitals, wherever. What we're doing in partnership with them is seeding how to integrate essentially natural language processing and AI to ensure Guarani is integrated in everything. So keeping the culture, keeping what is unique and distinct to Paraguay, but bringing it into the 21st century. And that is a test, it's an experimentation, and that's the type of funding that the lab inherently brings to bear. So our hope is that that gets to scale through policy and regulation and practice across Paraguay. But you got to take that risk and you got to seed that idea. And that's exactly what the lab does. And it, I think, reflects the bridging of the past and bringing it into the future. And I just simply end, because I know we have some questions coming up from our friends in the audience. I would ask that you measure us, you evaluate us on our actions and not just our words. And I think that the IDB has a history of action that shows the results anchored in impacting community. And I know the lab and the team that represents the lab is very excited to partner with you in achieving that. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Graham, and what a wonderful example here in Paraguay that really brings all of us together. So thank you so much. It's now time for our open question and answer section. I'm going to invite our colleague Yolanda Lopez.
Thank you to the panelists. We will now begin the Q&A session. I invite Yolanda Lopez, Chief of the IDB Communications Division, who will moderate this session.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today and being part of the CSO Forum. We will now begin the Q&A portion, a space for open exchange. We'll take questions from those here in the audience, but also via QR code from participants in the room and online. When you ask a question, please say your name and the organization you represent. Questions may be asked in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Now, let's begin. While you think your question, I have one for the panel. Let's begin with Mrs. Scriven. This question is for IDB Invest. What concrete steps is IDB Invest taking to make sure its investments, especially large infrastructure projects, actually deliver real social, environmental benefits while protecting the communities they affect? We will start with IDB Invest, and then we will go with Vice President Ana Maria to give us her perspective.
Thank you very much, Yolanda. Thank you for the question. So as I said at the beginning, we do engage with... Okay. We do engage heavily in very complex projects. And I think the debate that we want to have with all of you is not only what projects we look at, but how we look at projects. So early engagement is extremely important. We're going to, obviously, with the leadership of Tatiana, have a much closer engagement with civil society organizations to get a much better understanding of all the work that we need to do for these large, complex infrastructure projects. So early engagement is the first thing I wanted to mention. The second thing I wanted to mention, we do look at this as an enormous opportunity to understand it. We're physically in Washington. We have offices in all of our 26 countries. But civil society organizations are much closer to the community than we will ever be. So getting a much better understanding of the impact, the social and environmental impact of the work we do, we want to have those early conversations to prepare for this. Third, I did want to mention that usually when we do look at these projects, when we don't structure these projects well, we do end up losing money. So this is not only let's do good to the society, but it's also to protect an institution that has at its core improving lives. So I think it's important that we understand that we're all in this together to be able to do the project. We also have enhanced our engagement with civil society organizations with a management tool that we have to engage when you feel that a project is not going in the right direction. In the past, you engaged directly with MISI. What we are now, we have this early engagement tool. We've got more than 20 projects, I believe, that we're in the middle of these discussions to see if we can get a better understanding of things that we need to correct. And last but not least, obviously, you have the recourse of MISI, that you can go directly with a formal complaint, and that triggers a procedure that we need to follow. So I would say early engagement to get a much better understanding of the community. It's not only your interest, but it's also our interest. And when we engage throughout the project, a very open and transparent communication of how we engage. I do want to really emphasize the importance of collaboration to understand how we do projects. We might disagree on some of the projects that we need to do, but I think it's important that we agree on how we do those projects if we move ahead with those projects. So thank you.
Thank you for your answer, Ana Maria.
Thank you, Yolanda. I mentioned part of what we do, but let me go a step back. One important thing about engaging with the civil society and applying the environmental and social safeguard protocol is that this is an integral part of the design of our projects. We need to do this in order for our projects to have impact and to have a large impact in the communities we are serving. So that we are fully committed to that. We do so in many ways. First, we have, as I said, and as James mentioned, early engagement with the communities, and we have an engagement plan that is very important, but we also apply all the environmental and social protocols since the design of the project. Even when we are starting to discuss the project, we involve the ESG team that is working with us in that respect. In addition, then we are, throughout the whole execution of the project, the team is supporting the executing agency to make sure that all the safeguards are in place and we are complying with it, and to engage with the civil society. This is something that is very important. In addition, we are strengthening the division that is in charge of this. It used to be a unit, now it's a division, and it's important. We are expanding the number of people that are dedicated to this. And very importantly, we are decentralizing ESG so that they are located in all the country offices and we can support the execution of the projects hand in hand. So these are the things that we are doing, but as James mentioned, early engagement and participating since we are designing the project is very important.
Thank you, Ana Maria. Now we'll go to the floor. Do we have a question in the floor? Okay.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Matt Aubrey. I'm the Executive Director for the Organization for Responsible Governance in the Bahamas. And I have a question that's a follow-up, building on something that came from the stock take from American University, a dichotomy that the IDB staff and the civil society had the similar beliefs, but we still see that engagement is happening more typically as a reactive or a compliance-based activity. So my question is, what institutional incentives exist within the bank to drive that less regulatory approach and a more proactive and strategic approach that's going to ensure not only that the IDB staff, but that the clients engage early stage and in a meaningful way, particularly in a time where there is such bold plans for investment? Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to answer? Annabelle, you want to answer that one?
Sure. Thank you very much for your question. And let me go back to the country strategy, because really the design of the country strategy is a very important moment for the work that we all do. The country strategy defines the basic umbrella framework, if I may, that identifies the main development challenges that a country faces. And it is built both the identification of the challenges, but also the areas of priority engagement of the IDB group are built throughout the preparation of the strategy. So this engagement with civil society, which as I was mentioning before, we aim it to be more structured, more transparent, and more sustained over time is absolutely critical to make sure that those perspectives inform what will be our medium-term engagement in a country, because this country's strategies are normally prepared for, 4, 5, sometimes even 6-year periods. So they speak, I think, to the more strategic engagement that we want to have with civil society.
James?
I'm going to have to share mic with my dear friends, Annabelle, because Tatiana stole mine. So I did want to double down on that. So one, obviously, the engagement with the university is going to help us get a much better understanding of what we engage. Your question goes directly to incentives. And I think it's important to understand that the people that work in IDB Group are motivated by improving lives. And it's at the core. We don't get bonuses like Wall Street. We're focused on, and our board is focused on, delivering better projects. So I would say that the biggest incentive that we have now that we've got a closer engagement with the civil society organization is make sure that this engagement produces better projects, more lasting projects. And we will ingrain that in the entire incentive programs that we have, because we measure the effect of our business on how many lives are improved, access to electricity, access to water. So I think gradually things are going to change in the direction that you're pointing.
Thank you. While we wait for another question on the floor, this is a question for Ana Maria. This comes from Jamaica. It says, the success of development projects is often measured by economic terms. How does the IDB measure whether its projects are actually improving communities?
Thank you. I think this is a very important question. And it's an important question because we not only measure the projects related to the economic or the rate of return of the project, but we do so, and very importantly, measuring whether the projects change the life of the beneficiaries of the project. And we do so in a very rigorous way, doing impact evaluations of the projects where we measure whether the project had an impact on the beneficiaries of the project. We measure, for example, when we are doing a health project, whether the health of the beneficiaries improved, and in very specific dimensions. We measure when we are doing an education project, whether the project improved the learning of the children and with a high quality, and we do so in all of the projects. And this is institutionalized in a way such that when we finish the project, we report the results of the projects, and the project is declared satisfactory only if we achieved the results of the project. So this is a way in which we do that, and this is embedded in the way that we work, and that's why I mentioned that for us, the design of the project is important for achieving this quality and for improving really the lives of the beneficiaries of our projects.
Thank you. Anyone else wants to say anything more about the impact? Okay, so let's go to the floor now.
Good morning. My name is Peter Thompson, and I'm a managing consultant to the civil society organizations in Barbados. This question is for Graham. Innovation follows a power law. This requires many experiments, most of which will not succeed, to produce a few which are transformative. Is the IDB lab prepared to create a dedicated facility for micro investments in the USD 5,000 to 50,000 range, with learning-centered evaluation, where portfolio-level success is the measure, and project-level failure is not just tolerated, but expected, because it is the way we learn?
An absolutely fantastic question. I would invite you to all of the meetings that the lab team has. That's the heart, that your question truly is at the heart of what our value proposition is. And it also reflects the tension that we have to hold. What we're trying to accomplish is not easy, and yet simplicity is what we're trying to achieve. trying to improve people's lives. That is the foundational cornerstone element. The pathway that you try to accomplish that is the challenge that we all face. And we have different tools in every one of the seats here on the stage and our colleagues here in the audience. That's what's compelling about the group, is that we have an incredibly diverse set of tools with common intention, impact to improve people's lives. Now for the lab, we're in many ways privileged to have the best tools to take the most risk. And risk is frequently used, but often not understood when we use it and talk about the lab. But your question is at the core of what we're meant to do by taking risk, which is, it's the phrase, let 1,000 flowers bloom. So our objective is to identify ideas, entrepreneurs with new approaches, new businesses and organizations that have completely reconsidered how to solve a challenge. And the mechanisms that we can actually support are considerable. And we have really the full toolkit, from capacity building, training support, networks, relationships, now to capital. With the MIF 4 being officially open, it really reflects a diversity of funding revenue as well as capital allocation. So all the conditions are in place, and then it becomes a design question. So I think at the core of what you're saying is, could we go micro, if you will, micro experimentation, micro support? I'll leave it to the team to determine to what level, but fundamentally we have to take risk on every project, but it's in the aggregate of the portfolio, which is what you've described, where the overall impact gets measured. We have seen, and our 30+ years of evidence shows, that that's exactly the approach that we need to take. And I wouldn't want to discuss the book of failures that the lab has, although we'd be happy to, but in fact, it's the collective book of successes driven by many firsts that we've supported. If we never stretch to do that one risk, to take that one risk, we'd never have those firsts that have fundamentally transformed entire sectors and entire industries by the little tests and the little experiments that we've taken. So in essence, measure us again by our portfolio over time, over the next 7+ years. The question is, what are the specific mechanisms that we can use? And I'm happy to talk to you offline with some of your ideas to understand what you're thinking.
Thank you, Graham. I have another question. So we have talked, let me ask you a question from the QR. We have talked about synergies between private sector, public sector, and with the civil society. This question is about the other international financial organizations, the IFIs. So how we coordinate with the other organizations as well? Who wants to answer? Annabelle?
Yes, so this is a very important question. And since the development challenges of every country are not for just, they're so complex that it's not just for one organization to address those developmental challenges. So this is why it's so important for us to regularly engage with other international organizations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, development banks like the Caribbean Development Bank, the Central American Development Bank, and of course, each one of us has its own area of work. But it's also very important for us to coordinate, to share experiences, particularly at the country level. So let me give you an example of this work in practice. So last year, Jamaica was hit by Hurricane Melissa. It was a devastating hurricane, and the country required a major reconstruction effort. So all of the organizations, and I have to say, under the leadership of President Goldfein, came together to work with the Jamaican government and society to put together a reconstruction package that was up to the circumstances that Jamaica needed. And it was that early coordinated intervention across the organizations that I think made a big impact in Jamaica.
Thank you. Another example?
Maybe I could mention
Yes.
with the World Bank, we're discussing the idea of a mutual reliance framework. And the idea of this is to reduce transaction costs to our clients. This is still under negotiation. Our board still hasn't voted on it explicitly, but just to let you know, the World Bank already agreed such a framework with the Asian Development Bank, and that's another tool that we have on the table going forward to work together.
Thank you. Let's go now to the floor again.
Bueno, muy buenos días.
Good morning. Thank you. Greetings from the Amazon basin with more than 500 indigenous communities, and we bring a question. Is it possible to include a differentiated approach to incorporate indigenous knowledge systems in the plans, policies, and projects the bank undertakes so that we as indigenous peoples can engage in that direct intercultural conversation? Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. That is a very important question. In the environmental and social policy framework the bank has, there is a specific chapter, a specific standard for indigenous and traditional peoples. And there we define how we engage with indigenous and traditional communities when a project does have an impact on those communities. So what does it say? It says that when projects are being prepared, there must be a social analysis, there must be a cultural analysis, and there must be a consultative process to arrive at strategies for the engagement with indigenous peoples. And this is to ensure that when a project is being designed, the governance structures, the traditions, the culture, and the question you just asked, the knowledge of indigenous peoples, are brought to bear. This is embedded in our project design system, and it is governed by the policy I just referenced. Thank you, Ana Maria. There's another question, and how can we make sure that successful experiences working with civil society can be shared with other countries? And this question comes to us from Paraguay. I imagine that you do have an excellent track record of working with civil society in Paraguay. Who wants to answer? Ana Maria? Well, I can share some initial thoughts. I would say that part of what we are doing in our engagement with civil societies under Tatiana's leadership takes the process of exchanging good practices, information about successful stories, and take those to other countries. And that is what we intend to do with a plan so that we can share positive experiences with other countries. For example, we have looked for ways to not only work with different civil society organizations, sharing those success stories, but also finding ways to include them in our projects. And that is because we do involve the civil society in our project design process in a rigorous and also very respectful way. Another question? Thank you. Good morning.
I'd like to ask if, as part of your engagement plan, are you including a perspective that's more local based for national and local communities, a way to enhance capacity for these partnerships? And do you also address children's rights? Thank you.
¿No puede escuchar?
Yo creo que debería ser Tatiana Shore la que
I think Tatiana Shore should respond. It's an important issue, and it's part of how we are structuring the plan. As President Elon said, we are working by listening to organizations that are raising issues that are important not only to them, but also with a view toward inside the bank. Because in order for us to advance this conversation, we need to do both. Third, that's very important, is the people, our clients in governments. So the process throughout the year is going to entail a series of discussions that will raise the level of the discussion. So that is something that we are going to follow up on. We're going to discuss that, and we'll make sure that there is an invitation to be part of this broader group which we are creating. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Any other questions? We do have a time limit here for questions. Sorry about that.
Buenos días, Juan Carlos Salinas.
Good morning, Juan Carlos Salinas from La Paz, Bolivia, member of the IDB Working Group. How can the Inter-American Development Bank and its accountability mechanisms, the MISI, how can they ensure civil society's engagement as well as communities so that it truly becomes a consultative mechanism, a binding process that leads to true reparations, accountability, and an assurance that there will not be a repeat of projects, bank projects that cause proven damage. Thank you. James, would you like to begin? It's very difficult to hear the question. Can you repeat the question, please? And a little bit slower, please. Or if you would like to come up here, how can the Inter-American Development Bank and its accountability mechanism, the independent mechanism for consultation and investigation, the MISI, how can they ensure that civil society's participation as well as affected communities does not become a simple consultative exercise to grant institutional legitimacy? Rather, it should be a binding process that leads to true reparations, accountability, and an assurance that there will not be a repeat when bank-funded projects cause damage or harm. First of all, thank you very much for repeating the question. Now I'm clear. I think what's important is to think of how we're growing as a group, the importance that we're placing on mechanisms for feedback. We were just speaking of an engagement mechanism with civil society. We are not doing that on a check-the-box approach. It's not a matter of simple regulation. It's a learning process. That's one point. Number two, you have a formal mechanism, the MISI, as was stated in the question, which is a place to handle complaints and to learn from that. I don't think we're making the most of the lessons that the MISI is drawing from its work with you. So our commitment, my commitment, is to learn from that process, to have a process that leads to accountability. Second question ties into that, and this has to do with who is responsible for the process behind a project. Because of our policies, we work very closely with our clients to make sure that the consequences of that are on our clients, and our responsibility is to make sure that our policies are applied. Thank you, Ana Maria. Thank you, Yolanda. I want to go back to the original question because this is very important, which is to bear in mind the concerns expressed by civil society through the mechanisms that I mentioned. First, the projects that we implement have a plan that is very important when it comes to high-risk projects. There is a lot of work with civil society during project design, but we also have our mechanism for complaints, because when we receive complaints, we need to be aware of what complaints are the most frequent, what do we need to change in project design, and to make sure that these complaints are corrected before they get more serious. Thank you. Now, a question for Anabel. How do we make sure that country strategies, that consultation with civil society is included in the country strategy? How are you doing that now? Well, as I was saying, one important part of this is to have a very well structured consultation with civil society within the country strategy framework. That consultation process includes stakeholders in the community. And it's very important also to point out that the country strategy is not built only on dialogue. The dialogue is important, but it's also built on knowledge of an analysis of the country's development challenges. And out of that analysis of development challenges in the country, obviously, civil society's voice and engagement is very important in that. Now, as I was saying, the IDB Group's objective is to make sure that these country strategies, which are group-wide strategies, that they include civil society's perspective on development as well as during its implementation. What we want is that the relationship be with civil society be ongoing, so that we can be able to discuss changes to country strategies when needed, or when we can fine-tune the strategies. When something comes up during implementation and in practice, we find out that we need to make changes. So this is not what's called in English a one-off. This is a structured process based on dialogue, consultation, and obviously this translates into projects as explained by James and Ana Maria here. Thank you, Anabel. And once again, if you could speak slowly, because the audio here is it's hard to. I will speak in Portuguese. Good morning, everyone. I am a leader of Poipaite. It is a pleasure to be here. I have a question. If the IDB is going to have a wider strategy to support technology and innovation, indigenous technology and innovation, in order to recognize indigenous community economies throughout our national territory. Thank you.
People by there, and he's asking IDB if IDB is planning into develop a strategy in how to incorporate social technologies, specifically indigenous technologies, which were developed in the indigenous territories, in order to protect and strengthen the governance of indigenous territories in Latin America and the Caribbean. Yeah, Graham?
That is at the heart of the lab's responsibility. In my example that I shared in the Guarania project, embedding local culture, local language into an emerging technology is something that we're going to be able to integrate into projects across the region.
Yeah.
Sorry. So it's key for us to identify which partners we can work with to be able to support and integrate that opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Another question?
Hugo Cáceres.
Good morning. I'm Hugo Cáceres from Horizonte Positivo. Welcome to our country. This is for James. there's been an announcement, the approval of $1 billion, more than $1 billion in private sector projects for our country. In addition to the mechanisms for formal dialogue like the CONSOC, in addition to that, how can the bank enable civil society's participation in monitoring? How can civil society help with achieving impact as well as achieving transparency in these projects, which is so important? Thank you. Hugo, it's a pleasure to see you again. Thank you. It's an honor to be in your country, and I'd like to reiterate that it's an honor to have this annual meeting here in Asunción. I also wanted to emphasize some of President Peña's announcements from yesterday. He was joined by our president. It was about the work that we're doing with the private sector in Paraguay, as announced by President Peña yesterday. Over these last few days, we've had about $1 billion that we are investing. We are planning a further $2 billion investment over the next 2 years. That's part of your question, Hugo. Another part of this is how do we work with civil society? I would begin with Alonso. Many of you know Alonso, if you'd like to stand up. Alonso is the IDB Group's representative here in Paraguay. He represents not only our public sector window, but he also represents IDB Lab and ourselves. So the most direct channel for this communication is here in Asunción. As we were explaining yesterday, we are going to be hiring more people in our office. That's a very important step. Number two, we have an environmental and social group that's quite large. We have experts on social issues, experts in a variety of industrial sectors that will be working with civil society in order to get a clear understanding of these projects. Those 1 billion projects that we have in the future 2 billion, there are some very complex, very large-scale projects. So as we work closely with civil society, that is going to provide feedback for many of our decisions. So once again, the gateway there is Alonso, but we also have an environmental and social team that is part of this consultation.
With one question for all of you. So we have come a long way with the civil society, but let's do some self-reflection. What do you think, from your perspective, is still missing? What we can do better? Who wants to start? Anabel.
So I think we need to continue to work towards more structured collaboration. I think that we have come a long way, as I was mentioned, for instance, in the context of the country strategies. But I do believe that continuing that structured collaboration could be very fruitful for us at the IDB Group, and I hope also for civil society.
Thank you. James?
I would also add one, re-engaging formally in groups like this. I know that, I think for the first time in many years, last year was the first time we had a meeting with the civil society in the context of our annual meeting. I see it's growing, which fills my heart of the importance of engaging with all of you. So one, a formal re-engagement during the annual meeting is extremely helpful to all of us, and let's take advantage of that. Second, a better dialogue. I mean, it has to go both ways. You understand the complexity of the work we do. We can learn a lot from yours. So our commitment and a bit of the re-engagement that was signaled out by our president is to have an open dialogue of things we agree, things we disagree, and how to move forward. So a learning exercise on both sides is extremely important, but always with one plea, positive intent. I think it's important that we're in this together to improve lives. So our objective is the same as yours. Let's see all those commonalities of how we can work together to be able to produce this.
Thank you, James. Let's go with Graham, that has the mic, and then Ana Maria.
Building on my comment, or my colleague's comments, I think there's also an opportunity to use technology to have a better real-time diagnostic. There's a global advisory firm called Edelman. Many of you may be familiar with Edelman, and they produce an annual tool called the Trust Barometer, which is really a point-in-time reflection of how the public perceives different sectors and measuring their trust. That, I think, is an example of what we can have with civil society, is a more real-time diagnostic to really evaluate how we're doing. So while these engagements are critical, face-to-face really matters, can we at the bank have a more real-time understanding of what the perception is of our performance?
Thank you. And we close with Ana Maria.
Well, I think my colleagues have already said most of the things that I wanted to say, but I would add again that it's very important to have these formal and structured engagements with the civil society, but not just once a year, but in several ways. No? The second is that the IDB Group can act as a bridge for knowledge transfer across the different civil society organizations, and for us also to have an engagement and a discussion on transferring knowledge to improve the design of our projects, to ensure that our projects have the impact that they should have. I would only add that.
Thank you so very much. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you to all the panelists, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Amanda, James, Ana Maria, and Graham for your insights, and thank you, Yolanda, for moderating. You can share the event on social media using the hashtags Reuniones Grupo BID and IDB Group Meetings. The IDB Group reinforces its commitment to strengthening dialogue and collaboration. With that, we present the second panel of the Civil Society Forum, the importance of multilateral engagement with CSOs, challenges and perspectives. Let's begin. For this panel, please welcome to the stage Mariana Franco, Executive Secretary of Redes Chaco, Paraguay, Emilia Berazategui, Civil Society Lead, Communications Department at IMF, Argentina, Suhaila Basbas, Director of Cohesión Comunitaria e Innovación Social, México. Moderating this panel is Larry Sachs, Manager of the External Affairs and Communications Department of IDB. Let's begin. I would like to take this opportunity to let you know that you can download the IDB Group Annual Meetings app available on Android and iOS. Through the app, you can follow the event live, access the detailed agenda, and stay updated on all forum activities.
Baishapa, buenos días, bon dia, bonjour, good morning. Pues he decidido que para poderle...
I've decided that in order to communicate with everyone directly, I am going to translate into all 5 languages. So I'm sorry to tell you that this panel is going to be about 14 or 15 hours, so I hope you're comfortable.
Bueno, ya no más.
Enough of that. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Larry Sachs. I manage the EXR, the External Communications Department at the IDB. I am so happy to be here with these very distinguished panelists in a very beautiful city with spectacular Paraguayan food, very kind people, and tereré, which is endless. And this last point is very important because a development bank that does not engage with civil society, when you don't do that, that's like starting your morning without coffee or without tereré. Technically, it's possible, but it's never something you'd recommend. So, welcome all. As you've heard from President Goldfein, the IDB Group feels that civil society is our development partners. It helps us, it enriches us, it helps us better understand the complexities of the communities where we are present, aspirations, needs, and the challenges in Latin America and the Caribbean, which means that we can achieve much better impact, which is why the IDB group is bolstering its relationship with civil society with a very clear aim, which is to have a constructive, permanent dialogue that is based on trust. And with many of the organizations here, we want to build a plan that truly strengthens the relationship with civil society and the IDB group. As part of that effort, I have three women professional leaders from Mexico, Argentina, and Paraguay, each one with very impressive history working with civil society. So in this very diverse panel, don't be surprised by hearing a variety of expressions from the region. They are aware of the challenges firsthand, as well as the opportunities for this partnership to lead to more knowledge, better results, and more impact. I am truly proud and honored to share this space with all of you. We have Mariana Sujaila, who will share her perspective from civil societies, organizations to have a voice for a variety of organizations in the region, providing hope for communities and people. Emilia joins us, who will share her vision from another multilateral financial institutions on the value and opportunities of working together. But who better than to describe their knowledge, their experience, than our panelists. So with that, I would like to ask each of you to introduce yourself briefly, and then we will go on to questions. So Mariana, we'll begin with you. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure, joy to be here. First, I want to thank you for this event, for the IDB's enormous effort to bring us all together, more than 70 civil society organizations. I am the executive secretary of Red Chaco. It is a network that brings together more than 300 stakeholders in the Chaco, shared by Argentina, Paraguay, Bolivia, and Brazil. And it will be a pleasure to talk about our experiences with you. Hello, everyone. I am Emilia. I work at the International Monetary Fund in charge of our relationship with civil society. I want to thank IDB, Tatiana, the group for this invitation, and my colleagues joining me at this panel. It's a pleasure to be at this beautiful country with such kind people. As you may have noticed, I'm from Argentina, so you'll hear plenty of ches in my speech. But I would describe my role at the IMF as, on the one hand, an architect that helps the IMF team build bridges with civil society. And I'm also sometimes a fireman, a firefighter, when you can't build these bridges, when there is a dispute. I am usually on the front line trying to put out that fire so that we can rebuild relationships. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, IDB, for the invitation. I'm Sujaila Basbas. I am a director of a Mexican civil society organization called Cohesión Comunitaria e Innovación Social. We have an initiative called Know That We Know, so that you know who in our country makes these decisions. We have done research on what is the meaning of a fair energy transition for communities that are highly dependent on fossil fuels. And we've also done research on the military engagement in large-scale industrial projects in my country and what that implies for human rights and communities. But I'm at this panel not as a representative of my organizations, but rather as part of the IDB's working group, which is not a part of the IDB, and we are not funded by the IDB. It is a group of critical, independent civil society organizations representing affected communities. We monitor and support communities creating spaces so that development can be truly community driven. We have colleagues from our working group here at the IDB present from Argentina, Brazil, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, Peru, and Uruguay. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you very much. It's really impressive to see this many countries. I'd like to ask for a round of applause for this panel.
Muchas gracias, Mariana, Suhaila, Emilia. Es un gran honor tenerles en este panel.
It is really an honor to have you here, and we have voices here that are going to share a lot of experience, a lot to teach us, and a lot of practical experience. I'd like to begin with the core question. Why is this relationship important? Going beyond its principles, results are ultimately what's most convincing. So, Mariana, you've been a part of many initiatives. Can you tell us about a project or projects where civil society's participation has been key? Very well. First, to say that since I'm part of a wider network of civil society organizations, our partners have historically had a variety of relationships with the IDB Group along three strategic lines: resilience, climate change adaptation, enhancement of productive chains, social innovation, and digital technology in the Chaco region. But I'd like to share a specific experience where I led and supported, that is with IDB Lab. We worked with IDB Lab for more than 4 years to identify a connectivity solution based in the region for indigenous rural communities in the Chaco. Imagine a situation where it's impossible to get digital connectivity, where the closest city is 300, 400 kilometers away, and the impact of this on rural indigenous communities when you don't have access to the internet, and how important that is for ownership of this technology. So what we did with the IDB Lab, we had been working on a prototype in Argentina, which worked quite well. So then the question was, why not scale this up? Why not make this at regional scale and prove that solutions that are based in the region, that are community centered, are technically feasible and can be replicated anywhere? Now, not only did that lead to us scaling up the solution, but it also created new opportunities in education, access to public information, community-centered access, content creation that is culturally appropriate. And it also led us down paths that we did not expect. We were able to influence public policy, to enhance regulations on community internet access. And today, we are known worldwide for this experience. So we are a successful case study, knowing that solutions need to be based locally and that the local region can innovate. Thank you, and thank you for giving us such a concrete example with IDB Lab. These successful experiences really help us appreciate the work done jointly. Thank you very much. Emilia, we know that the IMF is also moving forward with its own renewal in its relationship with civil society. As part of that, uh, what processes have you identified where involving civil society is key?
Thank you, Larry. As you said, we are currently reviewing our engagement guidelines for civil society. We've had a very long consultation process, both in-house and externally. But in addition to talking about this, I'd like to also take a step back and say that as an institution, going back to 2015, we have had guidelines that serve to orient our teams in the work they do at three levels: globally, regionally, and nationally. And now, what we're doing is trying to ensure that our connection with civil society becomes part and parcel of what the IMF does. So the key part of engaging civil society is not when there's an issue or when there's fires we have to put out, as I mentioned in my first statement. Rather, we want to engage throughout the IMF's work cycle. What does this mean in practical terms? It means that at the national level, we have a connection and we have a dialogue, a conversation. And I stress this word because it has to be a back and forth. And we do this at key junctures when the teams are still thinking, designing, and making public policy recommendations. Why? Because we want to get the feedback. We want to get the perspective of people in the country. They know a great deal, and they can help us to better understand issues at the national level. And this happens in two ways. One is when we are negotiating the IMF programs, quote unquote. They come with many conditionalities which make us well known and perhaps disliked in many countries, and also we do it as part of our Article 4 exercise. That takes part once a year so that the 190 member countries, well, we do what we would call a health check of these countries' economies. So these are key points where we engage with civil society, but we also do it, as I said, throughout the process, not just when the team is on the ground in the country. And then at the regional and global levels, we also have engagements. As an institution, we have various regional teams. The directors of these regional teams meet at least twice a year virtually with civil society representatives, and the same is true for the members of our board. At the global level, like the IDB, you have your annual meetings, so do we, and we hold them jointly with the World Bank. Civil society is invited and has a space to engage with panels from the IMF and the World Bank. Our executive director, managing director, also holds a meeting with civil society where there's a Q&A, and civil society representatives can pose questions directly to the institution's management. They can ask any questions they have. And in addition to doing this, we also do a stock taking of our own global policies, the recommendations regarding debt levels, corruption, and what we're doing now, reviewing our rules of engagement with civil society. At those instances, we hold public consultation events. They're open to everyone. Their access is on our webpage, and we welcome feedback. So this is a consultation process which takes about a year, just to give you a sense of what it involves. So first it happens online, and then we organize roundtables with individuals who have participated in that process. So that's just to give you an idea of what we're doing. Like you, we already launched our first public consultation phase. It consisted of a survey, and we did this exercise where we looked back and we also looked to the future, and now we're going to be organizing the round table. So To sum up, key points are part of the work cycle. We don't wait for things to explode because then things can come too late. That's a great answer. I hope that we can participate in those roundtables. They sound very interesting. I'm sure that there's a lot we can learn from each other as institution. And this ties in with what Mariana said about listening to what the countries and the communities have to say. Now, how does the engagement take place and when? Some MDBs speak of engaging with civil society, and they do so in different ways. We talk of consulting, communicating, engaging in conversation. In your case, what has been your experience in engaging with the IDB and other MDBs, and what suggestions do you have for other organizations who may want to engage? Well, Red Chaco is an organization that groups many different players in the Chaco region. We've been working on this for 17 years and have designed a strategic agenda for sustainable development in the region and our aspirations in that connection. So having a strategic agenda provides more clarity in how we engage with the bank because we have a clear proposition. And throughout the process of building this agenda, we have identified grassroots organization, women, youth, academia, civil society, local governments. And all of this makes it possible for us to map our partners, our allies, and ways in which they too can participate and access the bank through the mechanisms it affords us as part of this engagement. Our region is biologically very important. We have an impressive cultural diversity, and we very much have emphasized the importance of development in the current context, and this is key for Paraguay right now. We include ecosystems and also food products in our work. So in addition to sharing information about what we've done with other organizations, we think it is important for us to come to the bank with a plan, with a strategic agenda, which tells us why, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and why we are reaching out to the bank, why we want to work together, and also to define the role we see for the bank, because it is a development bank. So we need to be very clear on the roles so that we don't have, so that we can manage expectations, so that there is no frustration. So it's important to start with a strategic agenda, which is more meaningful when it is built as a joint exercise, when it is built locally, and that gives it more legitimacy. Thank you for that answer. I take note and agree with the suggestions you made. I think it is very important when organizations are knocking at the door that they do so with a very specific plan, which includes concrete results. It is important to know how working together we can be more impactful. So thank you, Mariana. Suhaila, I think you've been very patient. We often hear that there are huge advantages to involving civil society organizations from the beginning when it comes to projects. Could you share any examples that illustrate this? Thank you, Larry. There are many reasons given for promoting civil society engagement. In 2024, President Elan said this had to be a key function for all divisions and units at the IDB because it contributes to both equity and effectiveness. At the IDB, at our organization, we believe that participation is a right, and that it can be beneficial for both parties, including with a discussion of the type of development we wish for, because there's no one single vision of development. The IDB Group can promote a collective conversation and bring to bear the political and technical expertise of civil society organizations, and also the knowledge they have as those who live in these territories, which is unique. Now, the advantage of being involved from the very beginning, I think when there is a strategic understanding, it's not just validation. It's a co-creation process that starts with implementation and spans stages until evaluation, involving civil society organizations and impacted communities strengthens the analysis of the context, also the identification of risks and impacts, not limited to economic and social and financial, but also economic and social seen from the vantage point of those who live there. That makes for more effective measures. It also enables us to consider the specificities of those who live there and build a relationship based on trust, and reduces the probability of having to resort to accountability or grievance mechanisms. Often it's thought that informed participation is optional or that it delays processes, but in fact, what this does is save time, resources, efforts, prevents damages, increases the possibilities of success, and also makes sure that what the work being done is aligned with what the territories need and want. I can think of some examples in which our members have been involved. For example, the work we did to provide universal access for people with disabilities, but which also benefits the rest of the population in transportation works, or when we use the MISI to provide restoration for sizable parts of the Amazon for the Tacanados people after having fought for this for 25 years. There also are times when the aim is not just to improve or correct a project. Sometimes the best decision would have been not to carry out the project. For example, the Alto Maipo project, which has led to a series of historical transformations at several banks, not just the IDB Group. This project was collapsed, but also had significant repercussions. So it's important to also include responsible exit mechanisms. Case in point is Ituango, where remedy is still being sought for some of the affected groups. We have a Manzanillo project in Dominican Republic, financed by IDB Invest. It's a gas generation plant that not only runs counter to the bank's promises on the climate front, but also seeks to promote renewable energies. Based on the environmental assessment and due diligence, the full impact has not been assessed. It's close to a natural park, affects mangroves and coral reefs, and can also have cross-border impacts. We believe that we need to look both upstream and downstream when we're looking at potential repercussions, and not just when it comes to projects. Our group has also helped to significantly improve the institutionality of the IDB Group and to harmonize with human rights approaches. We've done this through our contributions to the environmental and social policy and framework, the guidelines, and the institutional strategy. Among other examples, even though we have had input, we have not always found mechanisms to share them, and we're not able to significantly participate. For example, IDB Invest Responsible Exit Framework, also consultation with the MISI, and also the actions on green hydrogen, or looking at financial instruments like debt swaps. We believe we should also be involved in the country strategies, working with both headquarters and country offices, and right here at the annual meeting. And there should also be other channels. We have contributed to action plans like the energy and biodiversity plans and regional plans like Amazonia Forever and Conexión Sur. We have always made efforts to make sure that the lessons learned in those specific cases can be applied in other corridors. We'd like to stress the President's vision and that of other group representatives that the IDB is a group, and the work we've done with the public side of the IDB should open real possibilities to engage with IDB Invest and IDB Lab. We agree on the importance of learning and sharing, and that listening to organizations and communities is the best way to start the process. And this is even more so now, given the increased risk appetite of the group, also lending amounts, and the role that is being afforded the private sector as a driver. This should be done in a way that guarantees respect for human rights and the prevention and mitigation of environmental and social risks. Not only do we want to help change the group's policies, that is a starting point, but not enough. We need to change practices so that operations do abide by the principles, standards, and guidelines on the human rights front. As a group, we believe that informed, transparent, open, effective, significant, and deliberative participation should take place before decisions are taken. We think it's the only way for the IDB to fulfill its mandate of improving lives in Latin America and the Caribbean. That is why we believe it is important to have spaces for communication, for consultation, for participation, so that these are not only done at the discretion of those in charge, but that rather there are process and institutional capacities that make these not just mandatory, but also binding, not to make this a more democratic process, but also provide assurances on channels, timeframes, and scope. We want a bank that is open to criticism, that is able to look at itself, acknowledge its errors, and to build on them. That is why we are pleased to be a part of this panel as one step in that process. Thank you, Suhaila. Thank you for being so direct. We appreciate your views and those of other organizations. We value your suggestions on how to make things better, or how to do better. I think you stress the importance of having alignment, as President Goldfein has said, so that the IDB can work as a group, and we believe that will help us to design better strategies. Emilia, we'd love to hear about good practices the IMF has identified. How do you gauge success in your civil society engagement? That's a very good question. I would start with something that may seem basic, but which is important, and it's that there is no single model that we can replicate across financial or development organizations. And I think this may seem evident, but it's important for us to highlight it because we need to consider the richness and diversity of the civil society ecosystem. You can engage with different parts of the civil society segment. Even while the IMF and the World Bank are seen as sister institutions, so maybe we can say that the IMF and the IDB are cousin institutions. So we have our similarities and we have our differences. Our mandates are different. Our spheres of operation are different. The IMF is going through a process. It's journey, and I want to be very honest with you. This is something we're still working on. It's fraught with challenges, and we're learning by doing. We're learning how we can build a stronger connection with civil society. And with all modesty, I would say that we have found two good practices. One, and I think it may be the most important, is that we can no longer look at civil society representatives as external players who come to complain, to bring their grievances to our institutions, and therefore must be contained. We rather need to start looking at them as partners who can help us to better understand the scope, the risks, and the implications of the public policy recommendations we share with governments as a part of the work we do. So that's why I said this is a sort of public relations event. I'm here to speak about the work we do with civil society, but I've only been at the IMF for 3 years, and before that, and I say this with great pride, I worked with civil society. That is where I built my career, and I worked in this region primarily, so I have firsthand knowledge of the value civil society organizations bring to the table. It's hard to summarize because I think they're so important, but they work as early warning systems. We have seen that the first voice we hear, the first hand that goes up, the first flag, that indicates that there are risks. Even when they're not public, we don't yet have macroeconomic indicators that tell us that there's a problem or there's an issue. So they're the first source we have. They also help us to focus. We tend to focus on macroeconomic policy, and it's highly technical. So working with civil society makes us ensure that other organizations and laypersons understand the scope of the work we do and of our recommendations, and we always feel grateful for that. And then they act as sounding boards, especially for voices that are seldom heard. In a voice that is highly interconnected, we know that it's impossible to connect with every single civil society organization in the world. So the ones who work with us help us. They help convey the messages and help us hear the voices of other organizations. The second major lesson I would mention is that as an institution, we tend to focus on numbers, on quantities, and it's important to go from quantity to quality. True, the number of meetings we have with civil society is important, but the breadth and the quality of those meetings is even more important. So some good practices that help us improve the quality of that engagement is, first, we need to be aware of civic spaces. I won't mention any specific countries, but all of us in this room know that civic spaces vary from country to country, and that as institutions we need to be aware of that. And perhaps a model we use to engage in one country cannot be replicated in a different country because of the civic space in that country. Then having clear agendas for meetings. We have had pilots where we have co-created agendas with for civil society activities, and I think that has been effective. Another important thing is to have the right people around the table. And this applies to us as an institution and to civil society organizations. To give you a specific example, if we're going to have a meeting or a consultation on a specific issue, whether it's debt or corruption, the IMF has to make sure that we have the right team members at the table, the ones who have the technical knowledge, and we would expect that our counterparts from civil society would bring people to the table who also have the right expertise and experience. That would enable us to have a more effective conversation. And then, having worked on the civil society side for many years at the local level, I think it is important to give local voices an opportunity to be heard. We tend to work with global civil society organizations. They are extremely important and we need to continue working with them. But it's also important for us to be aware of the local organizations, how important they are, and to create more opportunities to engage with them. So back to the question, how do we measure success when it comes to engagement? Since we're transitioning from quantity to quality, we no longer measure success by looking at the number of meetings or activities we've had. True, it is still an indicator because it is a red flag if we don't have any connections in a given country to discuss any specific issues, but we're starting to look at other things. For example, are we able to connect with new organizations we did not have a relationship with? In addition to our connection with civil society, did we identify any blind spots we had? Do we see any improvement in the quality of our recommendations to governments because of the feedback we received from civil society? So again, we are transitioning from quantity to quality. I know we're speaking of good practices, but I want to be totally transparent. I think the road is fraught with challenges, and I could share a very long list, but I would start by mentioning ownership. How do we make sure that the IMF teams understand why they're engaging with civil society, and how do we make sure they have all the tools they need to feel comfortable when they have this engagement? And I say engagement or connection because it's not just having a meeting here and there. We're building a relationship which is based on trust, and this has to be a conversation over time. Then we also need to look at expectations. When we open public consultation processes, there are many expectations on the civil society organization side, and we need to be totally frank as to what we can and cannot do. There are things that the IMF cannot do because they are not part of our mandate, or because we don't have the technical know-how to address the issues the civil society organizations bring to us. And we need to be clear, we need to admit that, and we need to be able to refer them to other multilateral system organizations that do have the mandate or technical know-how to address those specific issues. As I said, civic space and the asymmetries we see worldwide are significant in defining how we engage with civil society. And one last challenge would be how to find a balance between inclusion and focus. We do want to work with as many civil society representatives as possible, but we also believe that we need to strive to achieve concrete results through that engagement. So we need to bring more partners to the table, but without having that prevent us from achieving results. So to close, I would say that unfortunately we are living in a world that is characterized by one crisis after another, be they social, economic, or climate related. I'm sure that each one of you can add a crisis to the list, so engagement with civil society can no longer be something we do on the margin. As I said in my introduction, it has to be embedded in the cycle and agendas we work with, and we cannot just expect to connect when a fire breaks out or an issue comes up, because as I said before, by then it's too late. So in our experience, we are still on this journey. We have not reached our objective, but when we work with civil society, we need to have a plan, we need to have the right people at the table, and we need to strive to achieve more concrete results. And maybe that is something other multilateral organizations may want to take into account, not to copy a model, because this is not a cut and paste model, but maybe it would help us to come up with governing principles For our engagement with civil society, perhaps they could be transparency, inclusion, respect for the role and work CSOs do. And I could keep on going because it's something I'm passionate about, but I'll stop here and may come back later.
Thank you very much. And as a representative of a similar institution, I think we have lots of opportunities here to explore these ideas in greater depth when we get back to Washington to see how we can work together. I agree with many of the points you've raised. Sometimes the process is as important as the outcome, and what's important is to listen to the voices of the community in order to improve our products. So thank you very much, Emilia, for that response. So we are coming to an end of our panel. We've heard some very inspiring talks on the value of civil society's participation. Suhaila, in closing, I have a bit of a challenge for you. Imagine yourself in an elevator with an IDB specialist on development projects, and you have a minute, whatever that elevator ride lasts, 30 seconds, unless you're in the Empire State Building. Now, what would you say to convince that person on the value of working with civil society? Well, I would say that it's going to take us several elevator trips, but I would say that we are in a setting of uncertainty. We have a crisis of multilateralism. There's trade wars, tariff wars, armed conflicts, military interventions, genocide. We are in a world where democracy is undermined, distorted, perceived as irrelevant, where the civic space is growing more limited, increasing the risk of reprisals, and the criminalization of journalists and representatives of communities. The IDB Group has a responsibility given all of this. As the president himself has said, it's one of the most powerful institutions when it comes to changing people's lives. And in that sense, I would ask that person three questions. How do we make sure that the climate, biodiversity, and regional integration initiatives do not duplicate old patterns of exploitation, and that these should be not, this should not be an enterprise that makes a few wealthy at the cost of on the backs of everyone else. The IDB should respond to its members, which entails responding to the rights, interests, and expectations of those that live in the region. We acknowledge the importance of non-interference. Within the framework of the group's responsibility, however, I would ask, what do you believe you can do in order to use your financial, technical capacity, your influence in order to contribute to relationships with financial intermediaries, governments, businesses, and organizations, all contribute to creating and maintaining a safe environment, not just for investment, but primarily for people and nature. And also, in light of growing military presence in mega projects, I would ask, what measures will the group implement in order for its access to information policies, environmental, social policies are not limited or invalidated through references to national security on priority projects? Scientific evidence and experience in our countries are key. We need to question and find a new approach to the development model, because when the model makes human beings the only important part of that, it places us above other life, that means we lack the critical processes in order to ensure the stability of Earth. The IDB Group plays a critical role in inviting communities, nations, people, governments, finance, sources of finance to think about the model that we want for development, for whom, and to work together so that that development is truly under the leadership for, by, and of the people. Thank you very much for that elevator pitch.
Un poco largo, pero...
Y ahora antes de cerrar, quisiéramos...
Before closing, we would also like to hear from those of you in the room, those that are joining us online. So we are going to have a Q&A session for the audience. You can use the microphones to pose your questions. You can also scan the QR code on the screen and submit your questions that way.
Over there.
Good morning. I'm Peter Thompson, a management consultant to civil society organizations from Barbados. I want to ask, what would it take to build a multilateral engagement architecture where civil society organizations are recognized as primary development actors in their own right? Organizations that deliver outcomes that neither governments nor the private sector can achieve. What does that recognition of civil society require in practice? For example, dedicated long-term, long-horizon funding instruments, learning-centered instead of compliance-centered evaluation, genuinely co-governed engagement spaces, investment thresholds accessible to community organizations in small states and rural contexts. What do you think?
Bueno, muchísimas gracias por la pregunta. No sé...
Thank you very much for that question. I'm not sure if I caught it all, but I think the question is more institutional in nature, so I'm going to offer the floor to Emilia. Thank you very much. If I understood correctly, I would begin by saying, well, I'm not going to speak on behalf of all international financial institutions, but just some things that in broad brushstrokes, that we are moving down the path of recognizing civil society. In fact, as we know, the IDB has a strategy for civil society. The IMF does have a strategy for its relationship with civil society. And it's not just paper. These are strategies that acknowledge civil society's role. What it is a way to guide teams in the institutions so that they can strengthen their bond with civil society. As far as financing, and I think this depends on the institution, and it also depends on the different civil society organizations. One thing very important about CSOs is their independence, where many of them play a very important role of watchdog. So I'd be very careful to say that some IFIs fund CSOs, especially those organizations that are watchdogs. Those are we need to think about that very carefully, so that there's no questions about civil society's independence when they ask questions about the work done by these institutions. But I believe that there's progress being made, and civil society has also made the most of these opportunities. For example, when we are revising our guidelines for relating to CSOs, that is a unique opportunity for you to bring up your ideas, your vision at the table, and then to talk to the institutions to see what's possible and what's not. So I would say make the most of these opportunities when there is a review on these policies. Thank you, Emilia. Thank you very much for that question. The only thing I would add on the IDB side is that I believe we have a very good opportunity here to improve our learning on issues such as dialogue or relationships with civil society. Our leadership is fully committed politically from the IDB, but we do have a limited history of that. So this applies not only to our engagement with civil society, but also institutions like our cousins here that really helps us develop that process. Any other questions? Good morning. I'm Gustavo Sanchez from Mexico. I represent the Alianza Mesoamericana de Pueblos y Bosques. It's 10 indigenous communities and peoples. It's a region that includes Mexico and Panama. I want to commend this wonderful panel, very much in line with the recent 8th of March holiday. And I would like to say that communities have traditionally been seen as project beneficiaries or affected by projects, and we talk about consulting with them. However, recently, indigenous community, Afro-descendant organizations, we're trying to change that formula. We want to be seen more as partners rather than beneficiaries or those affected or those consulted. Obviously, when there are projects, there needs to be full respect for environmental and social safeguards under the highest standards. However, we are trying to promote our own financing mechanisms like the Mesoamerican Territorial Fund, Clarify, which is a worldwide initiative. It's called the Initiative on Rights and Resources. And we would like to ask the panelists, what are your thoughts on a new relationship between development banks and community organizations where we promote our own projects instead of simply following behind government initiatives. For that, we need synergy. We need to work together with the bank for these new financing mechanisms. Thank you very much. Thank you for an excellent question. We'll begin with Mariana. Well, basically, I think that is the way to go. It applies to all of Latin America. The process ongoing in Mexico, it's very important. I think it's very important for our organizations as well, where it's not just about effective participation by our people, but we need to be partners, because these are projects that take place within their territory, and we need a different view of development and indigenous economies. The path to follow, I think, is that for all of us throughout the continent. It's the way you're doing it, and these discussions are very important so that other Latin American organizations, especially indigenous ones, can learn from the process that you've undertaken to look at the positives, the progress, but also to identify the bottlenecks. So I very much welcome the fact that that's being done, and it's a model for the rest of Latin American indigenous organizations. Suaida, would you like to add? Good morning to my compatriot from Mexico. A bit on what Emilia was saying on civil society or civil society organizations. When we speak of that, it's important to acknowledge that we're not all the same. There's diversity there, a plurality of organizational structures. Some are legal entities, some are not. There is diversity, as we saw yesterday during the workshop on the policy review. There's diversity in the types of relationships that we have with the group. In some cases, it could be more collaborative in nature or coordination. There needs to be a room for questions, for criticism from organizations like the one that I belong to. It's very important to be independent, which ties into financing. But there's another discussion that you've raised here, and that has to do with an issue brought up by several indigenous communities in a variety of places, and that is on thinking about not only who is implementing the projects, but we need to look at community alternatives to have an idea of what we call development here, but what someone else might call a peaceful life or a good life. There's different names for that. So it's important to think about how do we get more diversity on the concepts of development instead of, or in addition to just thinking about scale or who should uh, uh, execute projects. When it comes to indigenous, Afro-descendant communities and peoples, I'm certainly not speaking for them, but what I think is important is to respect their autonomy, their ability to their freedom to decide, and to respect their decisions. There will be communities that will require or that will want direct financing. There might be others that do not. In any case, in terms of respecting autonomy and self-determination, it's important to think about unequal power relationships and to undo those. If we create opportunities for finance, how do we make sure that that does not imply that the bank and other operations will not respect the rights of the people throughout its projects? Also, how do we make sure that those financing mechanisms do not imply discrimination, not just in implementation, but even within their own design, the requirements, eligibility criteria, the ways that projects are proposed, so that these are not discriminatory, so that these do not create barriers where even where there's financing for those that want access, so that it makes it inaccessible in practice. I think there's a lot of nuance to this discussion, a lot of things to think about. But if we base this on self-determination, respect for autonomy, and independence, and I'm sure there's a variety of positions on that, but I think that is what should guide us. The concept of non-discrimination and cultural ownership, that can make us progress on that. Thank you, Suhaila and Emilia, once again. Thank you, Gustavo. As for the IMF's view, it's a little bit more complex for us because one of the big differences between the IMF and other multilateral development banks or other institutions is that we do not finance infrastructure or development projects. If the macroeconomists at the IMF were to hear me, they'll probably kill me for what I'm going to say because I'm going to oversimplify this, but our financial assistance to the countries is basically provide money and put it in the country's central banks to create fiscal space so that the countries can in turn invest in education, health, work with the IDB, the World Bank, and other organizations. So we don't directly fund infrastructure or development projects. Now, I do believe you've raised something very important, very interesting, and that is to make sure that Native communities are partners with our organizations, and that is where that opportunity lies with the review of policies, working with civil society. In civil society, I include original peoples, NGOs, labor unions. It's important for you to participate in these processes and not or going beyond these specific processes to review policies. When we as institutions go to the countries because a loan is being negotiated or a loan is being reviewed, or because or where we're doing the financial health checkup on the countries on a yearly basis, to be able to participate at the table and to share your perspective because it is very valuable. This is something that we've already seen in some countries of the region where we have indigenous communities at the dialogue, and it's a very rich discussion. Thank you very much for your questions. It's a very important topic. As moderator, I'll respond briefly and we'll continue our discussion. But as we were saying yesterday at the workshop, we are planning to create a series of working groups that will work with civil societies representing indigenous peoples, those of you that are here, and also working with Afro descendants in the region to jointly co-create a way to work together. I really want to thank you for your questions. We have some questions online. The first one is from Mariana. What communities or areas in Paraguay have benefited from technology inclusion, and where can we get access to experiences and good practices, as well as the current status of these projects? Our base project is Madres Conectadas, where we are present in 23 territories in Paraguay, 140, including Argentina, Bolivia, and Paraguay. These are centers for digital inclusion. We also provide services, rather, the community provides internet access for schools, community centers, and for families. You can get information online, our webpage. It's called Mujeres Conectadas. We did go through very much a micro phase based on some experiences that we had in Argentina. IDB Lab helped us scale that up region wide. We are now in a third phase where we are focusing on a resilient internet. That means maintaining connectivity no matter what happens, and creating a network of connected communities in Paraguay. Access to the internet before it used to be in a gray area, but now internet access is in the hands of the community. But you can find that on online, Mujeres Conectadas. Another question for Suhaila: what tech challenges have you identified for civil society's participation? Technological challenges. Well, from the onset, participation should not be limited to electronic media. If we think of the standards on rights to information or participation, we have regional agreements that provide for electronic means of communication and information in a variety of formats. Digital, certainly. There is greater access to technology in many places. We need to think also of the skills needed for that. But as far as civil society's participation, it can't rely solely on those types of channels. As we've reiterated throughout this panel, as you heard from Elena and Mariana as well, participation needs to be take place throughout the entire process, which means a variety of mechanisms, procedures, spaces to truly welcome and ensure an equality of participation to get the diversity, the plurality that we need for civil society organizations, specific spaces that meet the requirements for a cultural belonging for indigenous and Afro-descendant groups. As Emilia was saying, we can't just focus on civil society, but we need to think about those who are in the communities, which means a variety of means, of ways to ensure that no one is left out of the conversation that might be affected. Thank you, Suhaila. I believe we have more questions from the audience here. Very good day to all. Welcome all to Paraguay. I would like to recommend the bori bori, which is one of the greatest soups in the world. Please don't leave here without trying bori bori. I am Mariano Barello. Thank you, Larry. It's a wonderful panel to hear from Mariana, Emilia, Sugaya. But I also want to share a few ideas. I'm a member of the Ashoka Network. It's the International Volunteer Organization. This year, the United Nations has declared this the International Year of Volunteers for Development. I should say that civic spaces in many places in Latin America are being limited, and I'm very concerned about the IDB's significant investment in Paraguay. In Paraguay, we have a law that affects the work done by organizations. It's called the club or the stick law. I am part of grassroots organizations, and this is a law that affects us as follows. It imposes strict controls, requirements, and bureaucratic requirements. It would be difficult to meet these requirements by small organizations and neighborhood associations that primarily work through volunteers. There's a concern that these bureaucratic requirements, potential sanctions, would limit community participation and would undermine solidarity. So we have a lot of investment from the Internet Development Bank in our communities, and then on the other hand, we have the government seeking to limit citizens' participation by imposing excessive controls. This is going beyond formal requirements. I'm very much concerned by the resources committed here because our grassroots organizations will not be able to formally monitor the projects, which is so important for IDB's projects. It's part of compliance, whether we're talking about NGOs or governmental organizations that execute these projects. So, what is the panel's view on that? What solutions have you seen, and what is your approach? Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. I don't know who'd like to begin. Mariana, on spaces for citizens participation. Yesterday, during our workshop with civil society organizations, this matter of limiting civic space, reducing civic space in the Americas is something that came up repeatedly. It's not just happening in Paraguay; it's also happening in other countries of the region, where all of us are very concerned, and we know that the mechanisms that we need are being affected. What we need in order to broaden our dialogue. Our colleagues yesterday from several organizations mentioned that the bank needs to have mechanisms in place in order to not undermine participation from organizations or those that are affected or subject to retaliation because of the role that they play. I think that we are all on high alert because of this. It's not going to be easy, but that's part of our role as civil society to continue to work together. And we all need to stand together to face down these threats and to remain on guard. While it's true that in democracies as ours, we need to be able to handle consensus and dissent, because this is a watershed moment when it comes to civil society. Whether these laws limit civic space, I think that the only mechanism that we have here truly is to continue to work on consensus through dialogue. Thank you, Mariana. Emilia, would you like to add anything? Yes. On our side, throughout my words here, I talked about how civic space is something that is part of our relationship at the IMF with civil society. Obviously, limiting civic space is something that we've seen in several countries in the world, and that's very concerning because, in our experience, a constructive, transparent, inclusive dialogue with civil society truly helps improve public policy recommendations. In our case, economic policy. That's what our organization does. So, to give you some concrete examples of how we work in civic spaces and our relationship with civil society, first of all, we do not replicate or copy models from one country to another. That has to do with civic space. Some countries that are more open civically, where it's completely feasible and possible to meet with civil society in person, where an IMF team is visiting a country. In other countries, because of limitations of civic space or other conditions, it's not possible. So we use other mechanisms for that connection, working with civil society organizations that are based in countries where there really is a limitation on civic space, where they don't feel safe, for example, sending me an email, I've used other ways to communicate with civil society in those cases. So I would say we're aware of that. We are working to strengthen our bond with civil society, and part of that process implies being aware of the civic space and adapting the way we relate to civil society depending on the circumstances involved. Suhaila.
I'm very happy to be in Paraguay and to be here with other civil society representatives. We see a trend, not just in this region, but elsewhere in the world as well, to see a narrowing of civic spaces. In terms of financing, the human rights rapporteur to the Pacific region has said that this right means not just the right to exist as a civil society organization, but also to be able to do our job. And that means having access to financing from a variety of public and private sources, national, international, local sources, and that too is a way to contribute to the right to meeting. The other day we were having a conversation and I raised a question earlier today in my second statement regarding how we can make sure that the influence and leverage of banks like the IDB is in fact used to send a signal to its members, to its clients, that it is important to maintain a climate that is enabling for the exercise of human rights, because those rights are important in order to be able to apply the environmental and social policy frameworks in designing and implementing projects. So it's important to comply with the institutions established by the group itself, and this cannot happen if people cannot fully exercise their rights. It's also important when we think of how to standardize how a group like the IDB can relate to a variety, to an assortment of organizations. The one thing we need to ensure is that there is no discrimination with the group and with the clients, that there are no measures or actions against individuals who live in countries that have restricted civic spaces. That should not result in discrimination. But as Emilia was saying, it is important to have a differentiated approach, not curtailing rights, but an approach that is differentiated and allows for affirmative actions or measures to be taken so that the engagement of CSOs and people or organizations can take place when there is an action, policy, or measure by the bank, so that there is no follow-up, there are no reprisals, there is no retaliation. So there has to be that as a minimum requirement. Participating in public life, in decisions that affect us, we should be able to do that without being the victims of discrimination and being able to access affirmative actions that support those who do participate in these processes. Thank you. Yes, sir. Good morning. I'm Benito Calixto Guzman. I'm Quechua from Peru. I am the general coordinator of the CAOI, which is a platform which represents indigenous people in Colombia, Ecuador, and Bolivia, and Peru, with their respective organizations. The indigenous people of Latin America, who number almost 70 million persons. We have an even larger organization, which is the Aviala Indigenous Forum, which includes the Kaui and Koika. From Central America, it includes SIMA and SICA, and two of the largest women's indigenous women's organization Talsila Caelemia. Hortensia is here from the Network of Women for Biodiversity. And I mentioned the fact that we are present here at this event because oftentimes we see other people speak up on our behalf. And we are here to say enough. We should be the ones who speak for ourselves because we are going through a climate crisis that is affecting our people. Our Andean, Amazonian, and coastal territories are being destroyed. No one is going to safe when the planet collapses. Under the Paris Agreement, we did say that we would not see temperature increases of 1.5 degrees. How much have temperatures risen since then? More sun, more rain, more drought. So all of this is leading us to a situation where we're going to see the planet collapse, and this is compounded by what is happening with governments. Governments too are collapsing, and international organizations are not immune from this. So your large-scale projects unfortunately have brought much poverty and much discrimination for indigenous people. So we see a hope, we see a possibility of engaging, of participating in a conversation. We have a standing channel with the World Bank. We have a roundtable that enables us to track the projects they implement, and we hope to see something similar to happen with the IDB. We want to have a direct conversation with you. We would also ask the IMF, given that it does issue public policies, one of which has affected those of us who are defending life. We are persecuted, we're killed. We don't want that to happen anymore. So we are here to say that indigenous people do not need spokespersons or interlocutors. We want to be able to speak with you directly. So that is my comment. Thank you. Well, that is an excellent question. Let's start with Emilia. Thank you very much, Benito, for the question and for your message. I applaud the fact that you're here to speak for yourselves. I think that is appropriate, and when Gustavo spoke, we thought the same thing. Countries where we have seen indigenous peoples involved directly, the outcome has been very good. So we don't finance infrastructure or development projects, so it would not be viable for us to have a committee to look at projects or a roundtable. We don't finance projects, but you are more than welcome, your communities are more than welcome to join the instances we already have at the country level. As I said, we do review our policies at given points in time, and when we do that, we have public consultations. And this means that any member of civil society, including indigenous people, can participate. So the door is wide open. So again, I'd like to clarify that as an institution, we focus on macroeconomic issues. So we do not make public policy recommendations that have an impact on those who are defending life or that lead to individuals being killed for taking such stances. We look at macroeconomic issues, and we're always interested in strengthening our ties with CSOs, including original peoples, so that you can help us do our job better and so that we can make better recommendations. So once again, that was an excellent question. On the IDB side, we do have private sector projects that are bankable, but they also protect the rights of individuals. They promote inclusion, and that applies to indigenous communities as well. I would like to answer your question directly, a question about having direct interlocutors. Under Amazonia Forever, we have a good example. There is an initiative that speaks directly with Cuenca and with other indigenous organizations. Tatiana, I don't know if there's anything you would like to add at this point. Thank you, Larry, for that question. So the question is about how to work with indigenous organizations directly and what channels we can use to communicate directly with those organizations and have liaison and engagement mechanisms that vary from country to country. So that is something we have been working on at the IDB Group. We start with Amazonia Forever and with Cuenca, and with other Amazon-based organizations like BICEP in Peru. We are undertaking direct programs, and that is something we think is very important. These programs were co-created with the organization, so it's not that we design the programs and then call your organizations in to take ownership. No, we work with Cuenca, with the Amazon Fund for Life, and with IDCEP. We've worked directly also with CONAP, which is the Organization of Afro-Descendant Peoples in Brazil, also with Goyabi. So we do have direct contact with each of these organizations because we do believe that it is important to have a space to listen, to have a conversation, and also to have a direct implementation channel. Thank you, Tatiana. I love the interest sparked by this question. I think we have time for two more questions, one from the audience and one we have received via the QR code. And I'll read that one first. Should civil society prioritize its role as a role that it plays in surveillance or compliance, or does it have a different role in the IDB group? I think each group should be able to choose how it relates with us, how it engages. In the case of my group and how we work with the IDB, it's not an either-or choice. There's been times when we have had criticism and we have had complaints, and we've also been able to make specific contributions to the instruments and also to policies. And we've also worked together to brainstorm, to find ways on how to do things better. So what is important is for the diversity of organizations be respected, and that engagement with CSOs and affected communities be considered in a way that is mindful and respectful of those differences. What we want ultimately is to ensure that we can contribute to what the bank does so that it can indeed improve the lives of those of us who live in the region, and especially the lives of communities that live in the spaces where operations are executed. So it seems at times it should have one tone or one approach, but I would say that our strength, or that it would be better to acknowledge the different roles an organization or group can play in different contexts. Thank you. Mariana would like to come in. Well, I would agree with Suhaila. I think we need to be respectful of the diversity of organizations. Sometimes organizations play a dual role. They can be a watchdog, and at other times they can be a partner and help co-create solutions. I think it's also important to respect the independence of our organizations and how we decide to engage with the IDB group or any other multilateral group. We do understand, I think, that we cannot refuse to engage or avoid engagement. Aside from how we decide to do it, but we need to participate because the projects and policies do affect the lives of the people we work with. So I don't think it's one or the other. I think that we need to play that dual role, and there are many other roles we could also have as part of this engagement. Thank you, Mariana. And if we could have one last question from the audience. Good morning, Juan Carlos Ocia from Represa Ingeniería and Consultoría in Paraguay. Throughout this morning, starting with the president of the IDB Group and then the panelists have spoken of the need and advisability of strengthening our engagement with civil society as part of the strategy to bolster programs and the results under the aegis of the IDB. Those who have posed questions before me have spoken of the need to have a direct conversation and valid interlocutors. My question is, what about the private sector? What about companies? We see that in most of our countries, the bulk of the private sector is made of small and micro enterprises, people who are self-employed. They are entrepreneurs themselves. So what is our role in that constructive dialogue? What is our place? How can we be constructive? Do you have a strategy that includes us? Emilia. Thank you very much for that question. I think that we have stressed civil society because this is a civil society forum, but that does not mean that the private sector is not an instrumental player or that we do not engage with the private sector. I cannot speak on behalf of all financial institutions here, but I can say that the IMF does have connections with the civil society ecosystem and all its players. We also have connections with the media and with governments, not just with the executive branch, also with the legislative branch of government, and also with the private sector. So just as we have activities to have a conversation with civil society, we also do the same in countries with the private sector. Our organization's management goes to countries on mission and meets with different stakeholders, including civil society, but also including the private sector. And by this, I don't mean large companies. It also includes SMEs. To give you one example, our management visited my country recently, Argentina, and held organizations with civil society organizations, with unions, with entrepreneurs. They visited an SME directly to work with or to speak with the employees. So as you said, it is a key player, and we do have a dialogue and we do have interactions at different levels because we also have contacts at the global level. Mariana. As Redes Chaco, it's been a number of years now that we have had a pillar which includes working with the private sector to establish connections, especially with the productive sector in the region, but also with the small and medium-sized entrepreneurs. Given the many challenges we face, it is important for us to have the private sector, the business sector, participate not just in creating opportunities, but also in setting common objectives and ways to tackle the existing challenges. So we have been doing this with the private sector, especially the productive sector in the region. And we believe that this partnership helps us to do more together and also to be able to have a broader scope. There's a false dichotomy at times that the entrepreneur is on one side of the road and civil society is on the other, that they're on opposing sides. And Red Chaco believes that having a connection and having a joint vision does make it possible for us to create more opportunities, and that is important given the challenges we face. Suaila? I would say that we do have different objectives. If we look at companies and we look at CSOs and affected communities, and as an example, I'd like to underscore what happens at the annual meetings in 2024, because civil society organizations pressured the president and the IDB. It was only by doing that we were able to be included at the annual meeting. Normally, banks are present, companies, governments, maybe not so micro and small enterprises, but we do know that larger companies do participate in discussions about development and investments. They were part of the conversation. It was only after 15 years that we were able to be invited to these meetings as CSOs, and we need to do more so that it's not just that we are at the table for discussions. We need to be a part of decision making. Those who have not typically been included, women, young people, persons with disabilities, people who live in our territories and do not own land, they're the ones who bear the brunt of the impact of projects but do not participate in decision-making about projects and whether they should or should not happen or how they should be implemented. So I think, as I said in my last statement, that it is important for us to look for ways for the IDB Group to convene all these stakeholders, including enterprises, understanding that we have different objectives, but we do need to create channels for the voices that have been left out. That applies to companies, but especially more so to communities. Thank you for the question. What I would add is that when we are developing our plans, our strategies, or programs in the countries, as Emilia said, either we speak with different stakeholders, governments at the national, subnational level, with SMEs, with private sector, with academia, with the media, and we use different channels. We have different platforms that allow us to have an exchange with the private sector to make sure that the private capital we are mobilizing is contributing to our country strategies and is being impactful in fighting poverty, improving lives, and generally to generate hope and opportunity in the places where we work. I appreciate your question. I appreciate all the questions and would like to ask for another round of applause for our outstanding panel members and for Larry for doing this in Spanish. So we'd like to invite you to take a brief survey where you can help by contributing to our engagement plan to identify common issues, ideas that can help us improve this process. To participate, just scan the QR code you see on the screen. And having said that, let's continue to work together. Let's continue to have this exchange, this engagement, to have better results for Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mariana, Emilia, and Suhaila for your valuable contributions. And thank you, Larry, for closing the session. With this, we conclude the IDB Group Civil Society Stakeholders Forum. We look forward to see you again at 2:15 p.m. in this same room for the opening remarks of the thematic seminars with the president of the IDB Group, Ilan Goldfein. We remind you that you can share the event on social media using the hashtags Reuniones Grupo BID and IDB Group Meetings. Thank you, everyone. We continue with more this afternoon.
us in Paraguay on March 11 to 14 for our most important gathering, the IDB Group's annual meeting. Last year was the IDB Group's record year, with the highest ever level of $35 billion in financing, while strengthening the quality of our projects and processes, and therefore delivering impact. This led us to a year of record recognition, including Multilateral Development Bank of the Year. Now, we need to build on that. The IDB Group will focus on growth, has foundation for development, including private sector network, critical minerals, supply chains, supporting countries in economic transition, and advancing integration among those ready to move. Annual meetings will have four main elements. First, conversation with the civil society organizations. Second, thematic seminars on topics like aging, resilience to shocks, competition for growth, among several others. Our private sector business forum will have several panels, small gatherings, but also bilaterals. And last but not least, our official governance agenda, where we will discuss our IDB Impact Plus and the new capitalization and business models of IDB Invest and IDB Lab. You also hear more about initiatives like La Crece, IDB Cares, LAC Minerals, Procure Plus. So join us in Paraguay or online as we continue delivering at scale and impact for Latin America and the Caribbean.
Cuando me preguntan de dónde soy, del corazón de Sudamérica, donde la tierra es generosa y el sol ilumina cada nuevo amanecer con la promesa de un futuro brillante, con la fuerza de sus jóvenes y la riqueza de sus recursos, la fuerza de nuestras aguas